title, but here we go. Hello. We're going to talk about how how decentralized storage is going to be create more sustainable computing and storage between the data center and the edge, right? So that's the premise of it. Let's go for it. Here we go. I'm going to talk about the agenda here. This is all of it. Just dive into directly. Hello, I'm Angelo Shelley. I work at Protocol Labs as the Solutions and Architects Lead, and I have a few things to talk about. I've been in the data center and the storage business and all the infrastructure, security, networking for the last 20 years. Hence my hosting company Linux and working for other cloud providers in the past. And I've been working on a lot of projects over the time, and my interest got piqued around, I think 4 years ago or something like that, around FILECOIN. And I started looking at it and kind of saw how I could transition a lot of my storage that I'm running in the cloud right now into FILECOIN. And I'm kind of going to talk to you a little bit on how that looks like on the tech stack and on the journey. And then hopefully we can have an interactive conversation after on if you have questions around that. And also see on how storage providers do that nowadays on the tech, and we have some offerings on that. I'm going to talk about that as well, and kind of giving you some insights on what's happening there. So first of all, kind of set the premise. I know Porter and Kenton talked about it a good bit already, but I want to kind of highlight a few things. One of the big things I see is the storage landscape itself is changing a lot over time, right? Over the last decades, we've been through from a single drive into network attached storage into cloud. The next iteration is storage with blockchain, right? Governance, looking at what's happening, seeing the lifetime of your data, looking at the entire journey of what's happening with your data and how it's being checked. So that's where FILECOIN comes into play. If you look at it right now, Porter and Kenton talked about it as well. We have a vast set of storage providers all over the world, 3,500 or more, 12 exabyte of storage represented over more than 44 countries right now. More than 1,500 clients are storing data. We'll get into that in a little bit, who that is and what they're doing. And we're over 1 exabyte of storage right now of all those different clients storing on the network, right? And like Kenton already mentioned, over 33% is life sciences, but there's a lot of enterprise storage as well. We'll see in that a little bit. And then between the client and the storage providers, I always say there is FILECOIN in the middle, kind of governing all that, making that work. This is the tech stack, it's what the storage providers use, it's what the clients use to get all that working together. Now, FILECOIN benefits. One of the big ones, scalability. There's a vast amount of storage. If you as a client want to store any amount of data, we have 12 exabytes available. Adding more is not a problem at all. So if you want to, as a client store data, we have the capacity. There is no limit to it, right? When it comes to accessibility, same thing, because we are represented with 3,500 plus storage providers and all the representation all over the world, we can replicate your data very close to the edge or very locale based on your requirements, what country, regulatory issues that you might have, like with GDPR maybe, or you want to have certain SOC compliancy in certain data centers or whatever you want. You kind of cater yourself on how you want to store that data, so it makes it really easy to access the data. And with the replication that you can do is, even if there is a failure of one of these storage providers, which you have to see, all these storage providers are basically mini cloud providers if you compare them to the cloud, and they all run their own stack when it comes to security and infrastructure. So it's also very hard to hack or break in, or even if one fails, that doesn't necessarily mean the other one is failing, so your data is always available no matter what. Then on the data locality, already mentioned what you can do there, bringing it very close. You can even host it yourself, which we'll get into in a little bit if you're up for it. If you want to add FILECOIN to your own stack within your own data center, bringing it super close to you and using that very efficiently. Then durability is one of the things we're working on a lot. The The thing is, you want to store data as long as needed. So for instance, looking at my use cases, for instance, with Linux, a lot of accounting companies want to store it for like 7 years, 9 years, depending on what your use case is. Right now, the longevity on FILECOIN is, because of the proving system and the technology, is 18 months, so that's a year and a half. So you need to kind of reseal your data, which we'll get into in a little bit what that means. But on durability, we have the tech to make that, you know, longevity go, and that's through smart contracting and then extending the lifetime of the data, however you wanna play with that. And then the one that mentioned a lot is the cost savings. I usually keep that for last because I think that should not be the reason for choosing a certain tech stack necessarily, but it's always one that you have to have that conversation, right? And if you look at the stack itself, if you look at how Seagate presents their stack, or how, you know, any data center presents their stack, or FILECOIN, storage is cost storage. Doesn't matter where you buy it. If it's in the cloud, if it's at FILECOIN, the big difference is, what I always see in cost savings is the stack and the usage of it. Like if you look at FILECOIN, for instance, you can move that data around, move it between storage providers, because it's all the same tech, so you can even move it however you want. See it as moving it between zones, like in the cloud, and it doesn't cost you extra. Well, if you move any little bit of piece or data on the cloud, it's gonna start costing you. So over time, if you look at the use cases of storing data on FILECOIN, there is no comparison. It's so cost effective compared to any cloud right now, that's a no-brainer, and we can definitely help you if you want to look at those use cases or whatever there. A little bit on our CDN technology. This is a project that's been around for like a year now, or a little bit longer. Very interesting to look at, and what it does is, because of our IPFS tech and our FILECOIN tech, you kind of can really build your own CDN network very efficiently, bring that data really close to the edge, and have your time to first byte so low. Right now the average measured is 320 milliseconds, but you can lower that even more if you build it a certain way. The reason why that is because the stack is open, right? IPFS is open source. You can like move those nodes however you want. You can build it private or use the public one. Project Saturn is the same way. You spin them up, and the more you use it in your location, the data will become more close to you. That's kind of how it works. The same if you're like, you have a company on the other side of the planet, they have access to your data, and by using it more, it just becomes available there, and your CDN is super efficient at that point without costing you anything extra at that point. One thing we definitely need to talk about is energy efficiency. I know it's a big slide with a lot of text, so I'll kind of cover it in a little bit, but our idea is by 2025 that all the storage providers use 100% renewable energy. There are a lot of like ways we're trying to tackle that, and one of the biggest one is the FILECOIN.energy one. It's a little small here, but you can look at it. It kind of gives you insight into all the storage providers on how they're using their stack. It will show you the compute, the GPUs, the storage, the specs, everything that's happening there, and like kind of maps that with the blockchain, so it can give you kind of like helping you to show how that footprint looks like, and then you can like offset that somehow in the future, and also get really good visibility into that. And the other part is like, of course, Protocol Labs, from our perspective, we invested a lot in, like for instance in the US, a lot in solar, bringing that down. And then the other one is just a little bit of a comparison, which I like, is that on the network itself, 120 megawatts of electricity compared to Bitcoin, that's only a little bit over 1%. So you see a comparison there, and we're trying to lower that even more because of the tech stack that we're working on. Another interesting read is green.filecoin.io, kind of dives into it more. Definitely check out the website. It will give you an overview on everything that's happening there on the renewable and sustainable energy usage. Quick takeaways here. I put it in kind of a text form, but highlighted it because I want you to have an easy read. Take a second to read it, but it's the closest to it is like the decentralized architecture gives it a really sustainable approach. If you look at all the tech that we're using, and I just highlighted a few things, we have a lot more up our sleeve, but I just took out the most important ones related between the data center and the edge, and it kind of really optimizes it in the way you want it. It's open, you can look at it any way you want it, we can help you build it from really end to end. If you want to have that conversation with anybody at Protocol Labs, with my team or any of our engineers, that can definitely help you get that efficiency out of it and see how you can make IPFS FILECOIN work for you and have a better storage usage in your data center as a client, definitely. Now, that was kind of the wrap up for on the sustainability. I want to pause for 1 second because I have more to talk about, but anybody has any questions so far, maybe, before I dive into more of the tech stack and the comparison?
Question about how you realize that. So you have different storage racks in different part of the world at the colocation, and just centralize their request from the customers, right? I mean, you use the racks in colocation.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like any data center provider needs to have a location where to put it. There are a few of the data center providers here, storage providers. There's Hidde from Decent, and there's Julien from Paris. He's like here working on like basically answering your questions if you have anything related to that. I can tell you more about it myself. I run it in Brussels. It is a mini cloud. Basically, it's like any storage system you run in any cloud. It's just the efficiency in it, how you use it. Very interesting, which I'll talk about in a little bit, for instance, is how you store data. Like if you look at the IPFS and FILECOIN characteristics, is that you can really dedupe your data really easily because we use this notion of content addressing instead of like storing the data, I guess, compared to that. And then you kind of never have to restore the same bytes again. You just store it once, makes it super efficient, and you can use that all across the board. Of course, if you want to duplicate it because of resiliency reasons or whatever, you can still do that, but you know, that's on that part makes it also more sustainable on that and makes it more efficient even if you're storing it in a traditional location. Oh, yes.
Just a very quick one. The SATO CDN, what does it mean? And then the question number 2 is you know, like Netflix, they have their own CDN. So what do they do if, you know, to make it sustainable?
Oh, okay. So from a CDN's perspective, like that content delivery network brings the data closer to you, which at that case, it doesn't necessarily have to live in any of the data centers that consume a lot of power. So it could be very close to yourself, making it more sustainable because like if you have the data way closer to you, if you look at energy usage on simple transaction all over the globe, like the network infrastructure, you're pulling it right really like close to you, which makes it very cost efficient compared to fetching it like 200 kilometers further in some other data center. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know. The word SATO, what does it mean?
Oh, Saturn?
Yeah.
That's our project name. So so the CDN is the content delivery network technology, and Saturn is the project name that we use to identify that.
Question down here.
Hi. So again, on the topic of CDN, can you talk more about? I understand that different storage providers can come into the platform to provide their services, but when we talk about using it as a CDN, we have the option to leverage different storage providers, maybe at a time or at a different times, depending upon their locations, to provide content closer to the customers. But there are certain issues related to, you know, purging the cache and more issues around, you know, when you want to remove those contents and then force things to be fetched from, you know, the original service. So when we talk about Cloudflare or other CDNs, it's pretty easy because there's a centralized place to control all of that. But in a decentralized place, Do you have something on top of the storage providers, or is it up to the clients to do all of these problem solving themselves?
Good question. Problem solving in a way, yes. But it's also, look at it, it's more on an IPFS structured way. So if you fetch the data, it's available. And that makes it automatically CDN-like. Saturn just optimizes that even more. If you look at, for instance, if you have IPFS storage all over the world, that's pretty easily accessible. If you look at the Saturn nodes, just brings that data closer to you. But then there is also the backend FILECOIN network, which is more like an archival tier. And if you would use that even more, which that data is on the storage providers, usually the time to first byte is way higher. But by using Saturn in this case, you can still have that same feel of time to first byte on very quickly because it's close to you. But on the support, yes, you'll have to know how a CDN works to set it up, yes. Okay, let's dive into, I don't know how much time I still have. Okay, small comparison on the stuff that I just talked about. When you look at traditional cloud compared to FILECOIN, this is a really good comparison chart. It's like, when it comes to distribution, natively FILECOIN does it decentralized, while when it's on the cloud side, it's more vendor specific. So they kind of decide for you how it's distributed, or you need to work with zones and replicate it yourself, or something similar. Access method of the data. We do key-based versus content-based. Content-based is that you have a unique identifier exactly going to the data itself. Key-based is like you're more talking to the file name instead of the actual data, which you can change that if you want to. We can dive into this more if you want to later, but I'm gonna go a little deeper. Then when it comes to immutability, real nice is that FILECOIN natively comes with immutable storage. You store it on FILECOIN, it's immutable. Cryptographic hashes, improving, that's been done every day, will make sure that you have proof that it's still available and that's still there and that it's immutable. While if you want to do that anywhere else, you need to enable that or pay for it, or build that yourself. Availability all over the world. Same with if you compare that to the cloud, it's more like specific to how you set that up within the regions. Durability, the same. If you want to have those 99.99999s, depending on how many nines you want, the sky's the limit with FILECOIN. Especially when I was talking about moving that data around, could be, especially on the cost savings, it could be a lot higher. While when you do that in the cloud, any transaction you do between zones, and it will cost you on egress a lot. Portability. This sounds like not super important, but I've seen it a lot in the field. Is that at a certain point you want to move data between clouds. Try moving data from cold storage Google into cold storage AWS. That's not an easy feat to do. While with FILECOIN, it's all the same. You can really just redo the deal and your data is sealed at another location. So there is like an easy portability there. And then the quality of service. This is kind of like diving a little bit more into how FILECOIN works, but with a vendor like on the cloud, you're kind of like signing a contract between them based on an SLA, like everybody knows. The difference between FILECOIN is that it could still be off-chain an SLA that you're like pulling together with all the storage providers on the network that you're working with, but the storage provider also puts up a huge amount of collateral on-chain, proving that they will do their job, right? So they're like incentivized to do it because they will just lose money if they don't service the data to you. So it's a way different model, and it's also like they invest, and if you're at scale, millions of euros or dollars or whatever you want to look at it to make this happen. So they are really incentivized to make sure that when you want your data, that it's there. Compared to the cloud, I mean, I just heard of an outage on AWS a couple of days ago. Go check your SLA, they're not going to do anything for you. So here we go. Kind of like, sorry, I like to pun them. But, FILECOIN Explorer, Kenton already mentioned it. Here are some of the clients that are on there. I won't touch on this too much. The reason why I always mention this one is because it will give you visibility in, okay, sure, these are all our clients, but it also gives you visibility into, let's see how those clients are storing data on FILECOIN. You can go into their, like onto GitHub, where we have all the applications of them, or how they're storing it, where they're storing it, with who they're storing it, how this looks like on chain, how much data that is very specific, all the specific categories that we work with on, like life sciences, enterprise, Web3. You can click through that, filter that, see actually what the state of the network is compared to these clients, which I think will give you very good insight on kind of like who we're working with and, you know, what they're all about. Okay, something really dear to my heart. This is from my own team, the solutions and architecture team. I want to quickly give you an update on what we're working on from a storage provider side. This is a little bit on the tech stack that you can, if you want to, run it yourself, or kind of have some ideas on what a storage provider needs to do for you as a client to store that data. So big thing here is like, what are we solving? It's a very high and steep learning curve to become a storage provider in the FILECOIN network. It's the terminology, it's a tech stack, it's, you know, choosing a data center, ISPs, like full stack solution you're building on top of an operating system. Then you need to learn the entire stack, then you need to learn how it works with the entire blockchain and the incentive layers and the structure. So it's very challenging. And then the deployment of it itself is time consuming because of that steep learning curve. So usually when we look at it, I can see up to 6 months, even to a year, before people are really like completely onboarded. So if you think about it, all those 3,500 storage providers, they all went through this entire process of getting that done for you. So they're very incentivized to be your storage provider from a client's perspective. And then what I already mentioned is like very complex to choose which data center or which hardware or which ISP you're working with. Now, a little bit how we approach that is kind of streamline that, kind of make those choices for you, and from a storage provider's perspective, lowering their OpEx and CapEx that way. Right. This is kind of what we're working on right now. To give you an idea on capacity, excuse me, and monthly cost and how that looks like. Our partners from servers.com are here. I think there's right here, sitting right there. So if you want to talk to them on the stack, definitely possible. Their locations are all over the world. What we're working on right now is kind of handpicked an infrastructure for you. The entire stack you can see below. If you look at it from a 3-year contract, which most storage providers would be looking at because they want to store your data as long as possible, you're looking at around $2,300 a month for the storage stack as a leasing option. And it comes with support, and it comes with customization, and it comes with the network and the infrastructure, the deployment, management, and the entire data center stack when it comes to cooling and everything. That's that. Then from we worked on a good bit here is a one-click deployment for the entire stack. Kind of gives you an overview of all the things that a storage provider needs to learn. It's like how the daemon node works, how the miner works. You know, the boost node on our end is kind of like the ingestion market part of like where the data comes in and then flows to the storage provider's miner part. The full automation, how the import of the snapshot is done, all the initialization of what needs to be done, security on some reverse proxy will be built in. We have a GitHub page around it if you want to dive into it. I can share these slides if anybody wants them later for the links or whatever you want. That's a part of the stack, right, on top of the servers.com solution. Then I mentioned sealing a little bit before. So a storage provider is not just storing that data for you, right? It pulls it through a complete sealing process, cryptographically proving that data to the chain on what's happening, making sure that it's unique, immutable, and that you can trace it every day, see what's happening there. And we need a sealing process for that. I won't dive into the exact details of that. Happy to do that offline, but that's a way longer conversation on how that works. But we simplified it with like one of our sealing as a service partners, which you basically just, when you see sealing as a service on the right corner there, kind of makes it a plug-in into another data center who will do the sealing as a service for you. Also optimizing your footprint, because you're focusing on the software. The stack is fully optimized by service.com, makes it very efficient. Sealing as a service with Aligned does it in a very efficient way, and they will be already like have a big focus on energy use and locale and all that for you. So it kind of makes it like altogether more sustainable and more energy efficient by, you know, having everybody do what they do best, right? This is kind of an outline how you do that, building an easy bridge between that. Interesting maybe to know on how the data flow works is that, does the pointer work? Oh, there you go. So data comes in through the stack from service.com over the internet. It goes through the operating stack, which is the boost node and the Lotus miner. That would before it will like store it on long-term storage, where you're actually, as a client, if you would access the data on the long-term storage, would go through the boost node and access it. It needs to first go to the sealing as a service provider, and when it comes back, it will be stored here long-term. So this is basically what would be hosted completely, and this would be externally. And it gives you an idea on all these are separate components that need to be managed to work together. And I think I made it in time. So key takeaways, sustainable and energy efficient, easy to deploy if you want to go with a solution that we kind of provide for you. Questions?
Questions for Angelo? Anybody have questions? Perfect.
Porter.
So service.com.
Hold on. I'm going to record this.
With service.com, I could be up and running in what, a couple hours?
So we're still negotiating that, but the lead time right now would be between 6 to 8 weeks, which is like substantially quicker than the 6 to 12 months that we're talking about right now. So, yeah.
One question about sustainability and about collocation.
Okay.
So when you choose collocation data centers, did you pay attention about their sustainability and about how they reuse the heat?
Not necessarily on the reuse of the heat. Not myself, but I know Mark Johnson. I thought he was going to be here presenting on the FILECOIN Green Initiative. But if you look at this page that I slide in there, let me see this one here, like on the energy efficiency one. If you go to green.filecoin.io, talks about all that and how they do that. I would also suggest to talk to Hidde from Decent and to Julien from CID Gravity. I think I said that he's from Paris, but that's also true. I would talk to both of them, both working on all the efficiency on energy, a lot of solar panels and batteries, and choosing the right location. And I don't know if they work with heat recuperation right now, but
we have the talks, but the actual heat coming off the servers, the outflow is not warm enough. They advised us that it will be, you can recoup it, but not at 35 degrees. It needs to be 60 or so. It needs to be really hot to be able to sustain something or be usable for. We now just heat the office. So we are reusing it, but not on a scale where you can sell it.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. For in the winter.
Okay, right, we've got a question down here, thank you.
oh yes,
Hi, Angelo. Thank
Hey,
you for
Bart.
the presentation.
thank you.
Is Saturn CDN the solution for retrievability long term, or is that a sort of temporary phase till retrieval markets are figured out?
The solution, yes. I mean, I work for Protocol Labs, so definitely answer yes. But no, seriously, I think so. Yeah, Saturn can definitely be that. It's how you structure it, and that's kind of like what we from my end and my team's perspective look at together with you is like you have the IPFS stack, you have the FILECOIN stack, then you have the blockchain in between, then you have Sadrin that would like have like kind of have that CDN like approach to it. We kind of help you map that in the most efficient way. And I've used Sadrin myself, and I structured it in a way that I can have really quick access to my node, like my storage provider node, and it works really efficient. And the reason why that is because Protocol Labs themselves, because of they invented IPFS, they're working on all these very efficient transport methods. And right now, before you had to go, like for instance, through an IPFS gateway to access the data on FILECOIN. With the new tech and with Boost having some upgrades, you can access this directly. So all that, like in combination to how you set it up, would definitely be a yes to that answer. Yeah.
Right, okay, I think, any more questions? We're just about out of time, which is good. There's going to be a change now, so I'd like to thank Angelo first of all.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to be transferred to the second hall, so I must have done something wrong, I suppose. And this hall is going to be with Dan Scarborough and a fireside chat. In hall 1, it'll be transition of heat reuse and sustainability through renewable heat, waste heat usage. Right, okay, so we're about there now, so I'm going to do a changeover now. Anybody want to stay in this room? Perfect, okay. If you want to join me in the other room, that'll be just as good. Thank you.
This is like normally 3 copies of every car file. 1 sealed, 1 unsealed, and 1 external. The external one is usually out. I need 5% of 5 minutes.
You've got some handheld mics somewhere.
No, it was doable.
Have you got any
No
mics?
question.
Et sans.
You've got 2.
Okay,
Thanks. So have you all had a good day so far? Yeah, if I could have been in 2 places, I would have been here as well. It's quite frustrating, really. That's okay, I don't need this to be videoed. I'm all right, I'm just ad-libbing a little bit while I get the extra mic. Yeah. We can cut this out.
Hey, check.
Thank you. So my name's Dan Scarborough. I'm the person that kind of put this thing together, and I've been speaking to a lot of you electronically, mainly. And I hope you found it interesting so far and beneficial. I am here with Johnny Fry, which is, first of all, a great name. Very jealous of the name Johnny. And I've met Johnny during my journey putting this event together, and I think he's got quite a unique take on the way Web3 blockchain is going to be adopted by more mainstream organisations over a period of time. And I've invited Johnny here to kind of talk about the things that he's seen on his journey and some of the key things that I think are important as two industries collide. I've been next door talking about big data centres and kind of digital infrastructure with, you know, much more kind of traditional enterprise and web scale customers. Ultimately, Web3 exists in these places because a lot of Web3 is built on the cloud, right? It's all built on AWS and that type of stuff. And I think the thought process that we've shared on a couple of occasions gives a bit of insight as to how more traditional businesses are looking at Web3 as a technology, blockchain, the importance of payments and that type of stuff. So, Johnny, can you introduce yourself first? Because you do a better job than I have. And then we can have a bit of a chat and see where we end up.
Okay, nice to meet you all. We don't bite. If you want to come a bit closer, I don't mind at all, but we'll. But if not, don't worry. Okay, so name's Johnny Fry. Didn't realise I had a good name, but I suppose it is better than Dan Scarborough because it's all over the place, isn't it? But there you go. So my background is pretty dull, really. I set up in my bedroom a fund management company, and I was at the leading edge of tech because I went out to shop and bought something, a TV with teletext. Anyone know what teletext is? Yeah? Sort of? Yeah? Okay. Used to book your holidays on it. And the reason I got teletext is because it was 15 minutes delayed getting stock market prices. So all my clients would have a copy of the Times, the Telegraph, or some of the swanky ones, the FT, and they'd say, oh yeah, I see BP or whatever went up, down, sideways yesterday. And I say, oh yes, but it's actually gone up or down or sideways today. Oh, how do you know that? And I said, well, you know, we've just got our finger or thumb or finger on the pulse. And that's about as far as my technological journey went at those times. So I basically ran a fund management business. We floated it. We bought a stockbroker called Brewin Dolphin, some of you may or may not have heard of. And they had a range of funds here in the UK and some in Luxembourg. And did that for about 25 years. And to be quite honest, just got bored with it. And one of the frustrations I had, running a publicly quoted, regulated business, I was spending a day a week on compliance and just boring stuff. And thought, well, you know, we've got all these other staff meant to be organising all this stuff. Why are we producing the same reports to different people all the time? Whether it could be the accountants, whether it's the administrators, whether it's the custodians, whether it's the stock exchange. And that's just sort of stuck at the back of my throat. I then went on there and became chairman of a fund administration business, all really dull, all financial services, but really relevant to all of you guys, because whether you like it or not, you now have to save money into a pension fund. You know, when I go back 20, 30 years ago, you had a choice, stupidly, and most people didn't execute that choice correctly and they didn't save money. So all of you, certainly if you work in the UK, you now have to save money into a pension fund because the government run out of money, basically, so you've got to provide for yourself. So this is relevant for you because I came across this thing called blockchain. So if I said to you blockchain, what's the first things that come into your minds? Just shout it out. What does it mean to you, blockchain? Come on, don't be frightened, please.
Trustless?
Trustless, data. What else?
Decentralized?
Decentralized? Shared? Ledger? God, they're all techies, aren't they? What about scam? What about crypto? What about that bloody Bitcoin? What about lies and deceit and Silk Road? Kalashnikov rifles and hookers and things like that. When it first came out, that's what it was about. So, has anyone heard of something called an ICO?
Yeah, there was some time.
What does ICO mean?
Initial coin offering.
No. Oh, come on, you're data guys and girls. If you Google it, it comes up with...
Information Commissioner's Office.
Absolutely. And the reason I mention that is because there's a lot of gobbledygook and there's a lot of people out there trying to peddle, you know, you should buy this token, you should buy this coin, and it's utter dribble, 90% of it. And that's why there's some discussions about should we just basically consign all this to gambling? But we have to bear in mind that most of the things in this, well, everything in this room is not regulated. They don't regulate chairs or computers or glasses or cups. So why should they regulate these tokens? So there's a lot of confusion. But why is it relevant to an audience like yourself? And I would say it's really relevant because the technology of blockchain, regulators, governments don't regulate technology, luckily. But they do regulate how you use it. So we started looking at how do you use the technology. And I was telling Dan an example. I was talking to a lawyer who tend to be pretty crusty, pretty dull on the whole, get paid far too much money, but that's a completely different story. And he was saying, what are you doing at the moment? I said, well, I'm non-exec on a couple of companies, and I'm looking at this thing called blockchain. And he said, well, what's that then? I tried to explain it, but after a couple of beers, didn't really work. And he phoned me up the next day, or 2 days later, and said, can you help me? And I said, yeah, what do you want? He said, well, first of all, we'd like to pay you. So I knew there was something wrong, because the money never goes that way. It always seems to go that way with the lawyers, but there you go. Sorry, I hope none of you are sort of closet lawyers or real lawyers. And he said, we've got a big petrochemical company, and they've just come into us this morning, and they want us to go back to them and say, how do we use blockchain? And I said, well, that's going to be a laugh, because you were getting confused between blockchain and bogchain last night, or the night before. He goes, no, that's the problem. We would like someone to come in and just talk to them. He said, you mentioned this thing called, little company called IBM. And I said, yeah. And QR codes, what does QR stand for? We all know what it does. Come on, don't be so shy, you lot. What does QR stand for? What do you think? Yet to meet anyone that knows, by the way.
Queen.
Not Queen. Quick. Quick response. And what IBM found out is that if you put a QR code on an item and then have a history or have a video or have some degree of being able to prove the provenance of that product, people will pay up to 39% more for the product. So I'm sitting in front of the biggest retailer in the world, because in America they've got 68,000 gas stations. I'm saying, well, what would you be able to do to your profit margin if just 10% of your products, you were able to increase the price by 20%? By being able to prove to them where did that sponge, that jelly, that whatever it is you're selling in your gas stations, where it actually came from. I said, and they said, yeah, but what's that to do with blockchain? I said, because blockchain is a technology which can enable you to do that, because it can show the provenance. And sort of the light bulb went on with this petrochemical company. I'd like to think we had a small sort of say in it, but they went on to set up a quite interesting supply chain business in the petrochemical industry, where they're tracking goods and services in the North Sea, and that's being rolled around the world. And the reason I mention that as an example is that we were showing them example arguably in the retail field, which is really nothing to do with, drilling for oil, but actually you can learn a lot from other industries. And so that then kicks off into creating a weekly newsletter analysis, looking at how, where, and who are using blockchain technology and digital assets. And so to bring it back relevant to you and your pension funds, crypto is about 1 trillion. So it's a reasonable sum of money, but it's not really when you compare it to the asset management industry, which according to PwC is 145 trillion, i.e. your pension funds, your ISAs, your savings. So where it's going to start impacting on your lives isn't really whether you buy or sell crypto, but actually with your day-to-day savings. And I'll give you one little example, and then I'll stop. And that is, at the moment, let's assume you all have a fund with, you all heard of Schroders? Or Goldman Sachs? Probably all heard of Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs, once a day, let's say you have a Goldman Sachs UK fund. Once a day at, say, it's now 12:30, so let's call it 1 o'clock, you can buy or sell that fund. And the price is made by, guess who? Goldman Sachs. Alternatively, you can do what the US industry has pretty much done, got rid of all their mutual funds. Now there are tax reasons for that. And now you can actually buy and sell 9 to 5, and you have 4 or 5 entities called market makers. And they make a price in the ETF. Well, if you digitize a fund, you go one step further, you can buy and sell 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So in theory, you're all working 9 to 5, Well, how can you look after your money and remember to actually buy and sell and do whatever you want to do with your funds? You can't. You have to use something called a fax. When was the last time any of you used a fax in this room? Do you all know what a fax is? Yeah. Well, believe it or not, so the fund administration business that I'm chairman of, we have to send a fax every day to the Central Bank of Ireland. So in COVID, we got a bollocking because for 4 consecutive days we didn't send them a fax. But we did get a message back, which luckily we took a picture of. We have run out of fax paper, please retry. That's still going on today. 60% of asset managers use fax machines. Now there's that other technology called AI that everyone's talking about at the moment. Something like 90% of all the trading on stock markets and debt markets are driven by algorithms and bots. And everyone's saying, well, AI is going to be the next big thing in terms of how you manage your money. How is an AI machine-driven tool going to open up a filing cabinet and look at a bit of paper or send a fax? So those funds, those equities, those debt instruments that are not digitised will basically just be moved to one side. And those that are digitised, they will be able to be used to do research on, analysis, reporting, and then potentially buying and selling. So rather than looking at this topic as a speculation and gambling, which, yes, it can be, you need to start thinking about how is it going to impact on something which you're familiar with, are your pensions. How is it going to impact on other things, though? How is it going to impact on your data? Your house, your car, your health. How can you sell that data? And that's where I think Web3 comes in and is super interesting because, and I really will stop after this.
So what are the timescales? So if you look at that example, right, and given and you're, on top of this every day of what's going on in the market, how big is the wave and how fast is it coming with these types of more, everyday life things and the use of blockchain Web3 technology? So, because half the problem is that, I don't remember when I didn't have an iPhone, and now I've got, an iPhone 12 or iPhone 13. Do you know what I mean? So things happen, you kind of get pulled along with it. So can you talk a bit about kind of how fast you think that wave is coming and that more kind of mass adoption of this type of technology?
Okay, so don't take my word for it. Look at, there's a little bank called Citibank in America, and they reckon that the value of Web3 is going to be worth somewhere between 150% and 300% the size of the third biggest economy in the world, i.e. between 8 and $13 trillion per annum by 2030. If you look at statistics from people like Knight Frank, Goldman's, Boston Consulting Group, these are all people in theory, they should know what they're talking about. With the greatest respect, you including me, we're just mere mortals. We typically have no more than 5% of our money in alternative investments. If you were a high net worth super investor, i.e. over 30 million, you have 43% of your money in hedge funds, venture capital funds, in jewellery, in fine wine, in cars, etc., etc. So there's a huge disparity between how we invest and how the very wealthy invest. Once you start digitising investments, it becomes very accessible for everybody.
But when you look at decentralisation, right, and the fact that, making something decentral is almost about losing control of it, right? So there's a control aspect. So, and you think about Web3 and you think about all these kind of young kind of programmers that are doing things for corporates to accept something that's decentralized, that's quite a big shift, isn't it? That's quite a big movement.
Yeah, it is. And well, okay, so let's look at what's happening now. London is the centre of the world when it comes to foreign exchange. The next closest rival is 50% smaller, and that's New York. 5% of the FX market is currently being traded digitally. If you then start looking at retail brands that are involved in Web3, so you look at well, Nike now gets nearly 30% of its revenue from its digital sales. You've got people like Burberry, Gucci, that are now actually using Web3 as a way to test and market research new products, new styles. I don't understand it, but people are paying more for a virtual handbag. Well, I don't buy handbags, I suppose, to be fair, so I don't understand it, but virtual handbag than a real handbag. Now, it's akin, I think, to the cruise line industry. If you're very, very wealthy, the last thing you really want to be doing is walking around probably any street in any city of the world with your furs and jewels and watches and all the rest of it. So chances are you're going to get mugged. Whereas on a cruise ship, you can have all that on display. Similarly, in Web3, it's a very, very level playing field. And quite a salutary lesson that I learnt 4 or 5 years ago. One of our clients runs an online radio station, goes all over the world, 160, 70 countries, 4.5 million people. And once a week we do a little radio show talking about some of this stuff. This guy, since the age of 10, has been in a wheelchair. And he was telling me how he loves the loves the metaverse. And I was saying, why? He said, because I don't get judged. He said, I can move my wheelchair faster than you can walk. And he's absolutely he's true. You know, I've almost got breaking a run to keep up with him. He said, but I get judged as soon as I walk or wheel in the room. He said, the metaverse, doesn't matter what colour you are, what creed you are, what sex you are, it's irrelevant. And you can immediately have a conversation. You can have interaction with people. And I found that quite interesting. So, you know, we're talking about being inclusive. We're talking about our ESG credentials, all that stuff, and FILECOIN mentioned it earlier on. This is all part of the mix. And now we've got a technology and we're going to have an environment increasingly whereby it's going to be very, very relevant for all of the companies that you work for. And a lot of it is going to be powered by using different forms of blockchain. And that's the other thing. Most people think blockchain is like the World Wide Web. It's the web. It's the blockchain. No, there's lots and lots of blockchains. There's lots of DLTs, distributed ledger technologies, and they're useful in certain different jurisdictions in certain different ways.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you go back to some of the challenges with the tokenized assets that are out there, you know, there are some like FILECOIN who are here today, right, where it's quite obvious what it's doing, right? It's quite a tangible thing. You know, they're decentralizing storage. It's moving storage into multiple different locations. But there are lots of tokens out there that don't have that type of backing. Do you see it splitting in such a way where, you know, things are going to be more practical value based in the next few years, as opposed to there are a couple of these tokens that actually do things and lots of them that are just
rubbish?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, the whole crypto market has been driven by fear and greed. Fear of missing out, greed, you want to make some money. Now, you've probably heard of Bitcoin. It went from 1 cent at one stage to $64,000. That's quite a big increase. You may have heard of something called XRP, Ripple. Well, in 2018, it went up by 38,000% 1 year. So had any of us put $1,000 into that, we wouldn't be sitting here now. So a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon. And so when we were looking at this in 2016-17, then along came COVID. Guess what a lot of people that were doing sort of crypto, they were selling sanitized gel, face masks. Guess what they're selling now? AI solutions. So there's a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon. And what we're seeing is there are a lot of these tokens are just rubbish. They really are rubbish. But there are some that actually do have some real value. But again, that's just the minority. And if you go back to what I call the real world, and my old traditional sort of asset management world, big companies don't invest in small companies. Asset managers don't invest in them. What they do is buy funds that specialize in them. And I think we're going to see more and more crypto funds, and great, buy a bit into each of those, but look at your main assets that you have and look at your other assets that at the moment you're not utilizing, but you're going to be able to utilize. And healthcare is probably one of the biggest one. And you will be given the ability to share your data for a clinical drug trial, and you'll be given something for it. Or you'll start receiving income, dividends, on investments you have, rather than, at the moment we have a stupid situation whereby if you own a share, you get a dividend every 6 months. Whereas there's no reason why you can't have some of that income payable to you every month.
So let's talk about why do we need digital cash when we have electronic payments? Can you talk a bit about the difference between the two?
Yeah, okay, so what basically we've done with most of financial services, we've electrified it, but we haven't actually digitized it. And a lot of the times that you're still running manual paper-based systems and processes behind it. So there's a messaging system most of you probably used, if you've rented a flat or bought a house or anything like that. It's called Swift. And that all it is just simply sends messages. NatWest owns BNP that, and BNP owns Goldman's that, or HSBC, or whoever it may be. And it's just sending messages around all the time. And behind that, a lot of them use something called CLS, which is a bank, a New York bank with a second biggest branch here in London. And that's used by about 11,000 institutions. And they say, well, based on your messaging, you've now got to make these payments. Well, there's another company called HSBC, and they have developed something called FX Everywhere. And they're now using FX Everywhere, and now Wells Fargo doing the same, and they're bypassing SWIFT, they're bypassing the CLS because it's cheaper and faster. So you've got in a situation whereby there's $700 billion a year of remittances. So these are the poorest people in our economy. So when we all leave tonight, there'll be a cleaner that will come in and clear up all our mess. There'll be a security guard on duty at 3 or 4 in the morning. They're sending their money, or some of their money, back to so-called, and I hate the term, emerging markets. How bloody arrogant is that? But there you go. But they're sending it back to maybe India or Pakistan or the Philippines or wherever it may well be. And they're being charged for the pleasure of that up to 15%. Now, I have 4 or 5 researchers looking at some of the articles that we do every week in Asia and Africa. It costs me nothing to send the money. It costs them nothing to receive the money. As opposed to about, it's probably conservatively 50 billion a year that the likes of, the payment companies, I better not mention them, but, we all know their names. We've all been on holiday and get wire transfers or the bank. How often do you get ripped off? Most of you have probably got people like Monzo or Revolut or a Starling card, because Barclays, NatWest, et al. Are ripping you off big time when you use your debit card overseas. Now, you're sophisticated. You know how the rules work. But the very unsophisticated, we seem to think it's okay to rip them off. So that's why we're going to see digital. And if you're going to have digitized assets, like funds, equities, bonds, well, you're not going to go back to the bank and say, well, can I have a cheque? We don't use cheque. They've almost been outlawed. But with digital money, we can then go, again, to the poorest members of our community that are paying pounds into their gas and electricity meter, that have a pay-as-you-go phone, and they could actually be paid digitally. There's 1 million people in this country that don't have a bank account. There's 1.4 billion around the world that don't have a bank account. Yet most of them, well, 2/3, according to the World Bank, have got that funny thing called a iPhone. I don't know about its eye, but it's certainly a phone. So, and sorry, to go back to your other question in terms of adoption. So, iPhones, they've now rolled out advanced data protection. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there was a lot of controversy a couple of years ago that the feds thought it was the Al-Qaeda, they'd got an Al-Qaeda or someone's phone, and they went to Apple and said, right, you've got to hack this, you've got to break it, you've got to tell us, because we want to see all the messaging. And Apple said, no, and there was a huge controversy. So Apple, in the background, we're working on a system so that they can say, we no longer have access. So if any of you have actually traded in cryptocurrencies, you'll know it's a complete nightmare, because you've got to have a password, and then you've got a string of 10 memorable words, and it's just a complete nightmare. Well, that same cryptographic technology is now available on one of these things. So you're the only person that will know how to get access to it. Now, you'd be a bit stupid if you kept it that way. You probably want to give it to your mother, your brother, your lover. Your mum might die. You know what happens to lovers. I haven't got a brother, but my sister's a nightmare. So where are you going to store that information? Because at some stage, we're all going to get a bit older, and someone's got to get access to it so that you can be looked after. And it's not just, and I'm not just talking about crypto here, I'm talking about all of your information about your house, your car, your health, everything that you interface with, and it's all going to go digitised.
So how does that change the person-to-person relationship? Because it means you're decentralising, so it means that you almost don't need intermediaries. It removes the need for intermediaries?
Well, it's going to re-accelerate the peer-to-peer. It's going to, in the past, we used to have a barter system. I knew you had some wheat, I had a camel, or I had whatever I had, and we would change, So the oldest form of money that we know of are ray stones, R-A-I, stones. And they found these in the Pacific Islands, and these things are massive. And somehow they quarried them and then sailed 500 kilometers across the Pacific. And these were all based, their value was based on how difficult and how big they were. They were based on something called proof of work. You'd obviously done a lot of work, you've got a big stone, therefore it's worth something. And it's the same concept as Bitcoin, interesting enough, proof of work. So they then got the stone back, and it's sitting outside my gaff, and it's worth a measurement like that, which was a large canoe and a hog. That was the measurement of value. And they literally went around the stone and measured it all out. They never moved the stone, but that was a form of credit. So that form of credit and that bartering, that peer-to-peer. And then we got all fancy pants and started having these brokers and dealers and intermediaries and agents, and all they're doing is just taking a little bit out of your pocket. So when I was running a mutual fund, I'd say, yeah, invest in my UK fund, and it's 1.5% annual management fee. No, it's not. It was probably 2.5% annual management fee. Because by the time I'd paid the custodian, the administrator, and the listing fees, and all the other bits and pieces, the charges went up. So the regulator cottoned on to that. So, you must now talk about total expense ratio. So to answer your question, we're going to see more peer-to-peer, which means that if you want to borrow money, it'll be cheaper. If you want to actually lend money, you'll get a better return on your money, as opposed to going through these layers of intermediaries, which, quite honestly, most of them being found wanting, which is why we have all these rules and regulations, because they keep scamming us.
So just to finish off, for the next couple of minutes, can you give us some more kind of examples of some of the traditional enterprises that you've seen and how they're embracing kind of blockchain Web3 technology?
Well, rather than list them out, we often get asked, can you give me an example of, I'm in the fashion industry or the agriculture industry or any industry, not you, your clients, your best clients. Just go back tonight and just put in there, whatever it may be, engineering, trains, planes, doesn't matter what it is, plus blockchain. And I think you'll be very, very surprised to see what's already happening now. We were talking about this quite actively 2016-17, and it was quite difficult. It was very theoretical. There's just lots of proof of works. We're thinking of doing this. We might do this. But what we're now seeing is people are actually very much embracing it. And certainly from a financial services point of view, I'm going after this meeting to see one of the clearing banks, a name you all know. They've got 60 people just looking at this to launch a so-called stable coin. So it'd be a digital pound, because their clients are asking them to do this. And they're one of 3 banks that I know here in London that have got teams of 60 odd people. The Bank of England just recruited 30 people to do a similar sort of thing. So this is going to impact all of us. But more importantly, it's going to impact your clients. And if you don't start engaging and talking to your clients about this topic, your competitors will. So the stuff you're involved in, your clients are going to increasingly going to be exposed to it.
So if you take something like FILECOIN as another example, are you starting to see that people are more willing to accept different types of services than conventional brands? Like, we don't just have to buy IBM. It's becoming easier to do business on a global basis if you're not a named kind of technology brand.
Well, it's one of the strengths of the technology of blockchain. Again, one thing I'd like you to take away from blockchain, all it is an Excel spreadsheet on steroids. It's just holding information more securely. But the one thing it gives you is transparency. So go back to the QR codes, go back to the example I told you about IBM, where people will charge up to 30 or 39% more. If you've got greater transparency, I don't necessarily need the brand name. If I've got trust that actually I can trust never heard of FILECOIN, but FILECOIN, I'm happy with it because I can trust and look back at what they've done and how they've done it. And the other thing that we're seeing more and more is that, with respect to, I'm a bit older than some of you guys here, and in the 80s it was all about me. It was all about he who dies in most toys wins. And there were horrible pictures of people being driven in their Ferrari, literally in a slope down into the grave and then backfilled because that was, loads of money and all that sort of attitude. Right now, there's much more collaboration. It's a much more collaborative approach when it comes to business. And you're seeing more and more businesses working together because they're realising that actually working together is much, much more efficient. But to do that, there's got to be an element of trust. And there's certain things they don't want to, you know, certain things Shell don't want to tell BP, certain things that say, I don't know, another company doesn't want to tell them, but there's certain things they share common goals and they're working together. And that's happening more and more. It's much more collaborative now than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Okay, so my last question for you is sustainability, climate change, carbon. You know, how do you think Web3 and blockchain is going to help in that kind of move towards zero carbon?
Okay, one of the biggest reasons people don't give money to charity is because they don't trust where the money goes to. It goes to some sort of administrator. Yesterday in Kenya, I think it was, a couple of £1 million was given by an Asian company, and I've forgotten the name of the company, which basically, because there were two projects that stuck to mind. One, they'd planted a whole load of trees, which they could verify because using Internet of Things and using drones linked back to a blockchain, so they could see the trees are still there, so therefore it's verifiable, and they're paying £6 a tonne for offsetting carbon. The other one is in Rwanda. They actually had distributed 5,000 more efficient ways of cooking, little boilers, little cooking devices, as opposed to them going into the bush and burning trees, basically. So they were saying, okay, well, we've got two projects here that we can carry on monitoring to make sure they are going to be valid. So again, using the technology to bring greater transparency, and using the technology, and we often think of blockchain as like a skeleton, and from that will hang big data, machine learning, Internet of Things, AI, and they'll all be working much, much more closely together. And that's what you need if we're going to do something about, you know, the carbon footprint that we're developing. We need greater transparency to really understand what we're doing and how can it be improved. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's very difficult to say, well, I've improved on that. So if you've got a record and it's immutable and it's fixed, and then you go forward, then people will get more and more engaged. At the moment, carbon trading is just a complete nightmare, and most of it is just greenwashing. It's just really greenwashing.
Yeah, so blockchain removes greenwashing.
It will help. It'll, in the same way, digital currencies will help to address the fact that all of you are involved in the shadow economy. Because you've gone to a bar and you said, "Oh, great service, there's a tenner." Well, no, Dan, you're quite flashy. You'd perhaps give £6.50, but that's a different story.
Not with services included, you know, 12.5%.
But when it's digital, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And in some countries, the shadow economy is, believe it or not, 80%. Nigeria had 85% of all the cash ever printed in the mattress. 85%.
Well, you've seen that happen in India, haven't you? Because they removed certain forms of currency, like within a relatively short period of time. And if they
Just change the colour of the banknotes.
Yeah.
I mean, Nigeria were going to do exactly the same, but they stopped because it was just the inflation was hitting 40% for certain goods. So digital money will help. Hopefully, it'll be another tool. It's not the solution, but it will be a potential tool around some of those things.
So, Johnny, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Johnny sends out a newsletter called Digital Bites. I would highly recommend you subscribe to it. He's got some really good stuff on it.
It is free.
And speak to him if you've got any interesting stories that you think he would be beneficial for him to cover. He's got a massive reach into this community. Thank you very much for coming down. Lunch is served on the main expo floor. And we've got a very nice lunch. I chose it. I'm excited about it. I can't remember what it is, but I'm looking forward to it. I remember thinking, I can't wait to eat that. And we will see you back here this afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.